You're listening to WooSox Insider, presented by your Worcester Red Sox.
All right, WooSox Insiders, we now have on a very special guest. You will recognize him and his voice from WEEI, from Red Sox broadcasts, or just overall Red Sox media in general. Baseball isn't boring, as you can see right behind him there. It is Rob Bradford. Rob, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, listen, it's nice. I was sitting down doing this. It's nice to do a podcast or anything on the other side. It is. I know how much preparation you're putting into it. It sounds great, and you're doing a great job. So it's nice to sort of sit back and just say, all right, you drive the boat, you drive the ship. Let's go.
All right. Well, then let's start right there. Let's just, before we really get into all the stuff that's going on right now, we got winter meetings going on. We have Craig Breslow, who was just here in the house at Polar Park for our WooSox Foundation's honors gala, where we actually got to hear some pretty cool insight from him as Joe Castiglione sat down with him here at the park and got to talk to him, which was really awesome. But before we get into all of that, Rob, how did you get to where you are today?
Well, I mean, not literally today, but
yeah, let's say where you are in your professional career,
and probably not when I was born in Nashua, New Hampshire either. No, it's like my story is, I don't know if it's a good one or a bad one. I think it's a little bit different because I didn't have my first full-time job until I was 29 years old. I was a freelancer. I worked at back when working at newspapers was the cool thing to do. I worked at a bunch of newspapers. I got to the Boston Herald I was about 35, 36, and, actually 37. And at that point for me, covering the Red Sox for the Boston Herald, that was a dream job. That was it. But then EEI came calling about a year and a half later and said they were starting this thing, and EEI was, driving the conversation. That was it. I mean, all the newspapers did their stories off of whatever was said on EEI. So they were throwing a lot of money at the website and trying to compete with the newspapers, and they said I could start a blank canvas, and I liked all of that. So I went to EEI to start that website, WEEI.com. And I had one full-time hire. I was allowed one full-time hire, and that was I hired Alex Spear, which actually it seemed like I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but that was not one of them. And so Alex and I ran the website, got the website going with a lot of help from a lot of hardworking people. And so I've been at EEI since 2008 in different iterations, and like you said, I do whatever's needed on the radio. I do whatever's needed in the broadcast, which has always been surreal for me, that I get a chance to do the Red Sox broadcasts. And I know that probably some people in the industry who are toiling and wherever to be radio play-by-play people or even color analysts, they're like, what are they doing letting that guy be on the Boston Red Sox broadcast? But so what, it is what it is, man. And then of course I write, and I continue to cover the Red Sox as I always have for EEI.com. So and right now my main responsibility, honestly, is the Baseballs and Boring podcast, which we've been doing for about a year. And that's every single day. So so that's my main responsibility. But as I said, the agreement was I also still cover the Red Sox, which, I'll say this for the millionth time. There's nothing more satisfying than writing a good story. Nothing. And so it's the hardest thing. Honestly, like, no offense, but doing podcasts are easy. Doing radio shows are easy. Doing TV is easy. Writing takes some work, but that's what makes it so satisfying. That's my long-winded journey to as we sit here right now.
Well, it's funny because every once in a while when the when the WooSox are on the road during the season, I get to turn on WEEI and I get to hear our very own Cooper Boardman doing the pre and post game show. And so it's always funny hearing, him interact with I hear you on the other side of things, talking to him for the pregame or the postgame, that kind of stuff. And, that's kind of, it's like a little inside baseball type of thing where, Cooper is a AAA, but I mean, he's a major league talent, and it's awesome to see him up there. And
I mean, it's really, like I talk about the broadcast stuff, and I'll go back to when I did it. Actually, the first time I did a Red Sox game, it was on Nesson. It was not Nesson pregame, postgame. It was Nesson. I was filling for Jerry Remy. They were rotating people in, and I've been doing stuff for them, whatever, pregame, postgame. And they said, "Hey, you want to do the broadcast?" I'm like, "What? Me? What?" And so I get there, and it was actually Will Middlebrook's debut, 2012. And I expect them to give me sort of like this 3-hour seminar. And I sat down and did it, talked way too much, and didn't know what I was doing. But I can't. And then I said, "Oh, thanks." And like, "Okay, now can you give me we're gonna be probably paying you in whatever." I'm like, "Or it pays X amount." I'm like, "What? You're paying me? Like, what? Really? You pay me?" And so anyway, I did 7 more Nesson games the following year, but that's when I also started filling in because Dave O'Brien was doing ESPN games on Mondays. So I be traveling, I would do the Monday road games and then whatever else games need to fill in. So since 2013, I've been doing a lot. I mean, I've done now hundreds upon hundreds of Red Sox radio broadcasts, including, like, everyone loves the spring training games where big number 97 comes in with no name on his back on AM radio. I mean, that's my jam right there.
That's the pinnacle.
Yeah, it's the pinnacle. And that's another thing, right? It's like I joke about it. I'm like, yeah, I'm doing the Red Sox on spring training and AM radio. I'm like, probably 2 people are listening. And certainly. And Joe has his way of doing it. And I'm like, "Really, Joe? Really? Are we really reading out of the media guide for the Minnesota Twins guy coming in out of the bullpen in the 7th inning of this game? Like, do we really need to know who is in the outfield? Like, it's Chad De La Guerra. Like, here it is. Chad De La Guerra is in every spring training game.
Where his father went to college and what he studied.
And so I'm
that's
like,
Joe Castiglione.
Can we instead talk about what I'm going to eat tonight in Fort Myers? So yeah. So anyway, what I'm saying is that I'm honored to do all of it. I really am. And it's not lost on me.
Yeah. Working in baseball is an absolute, dream. And I get to say, I get to do it as well. I mean, we get to have this conversation. This is a part of my job. So I am very much in that kind of pinch me stage where, I'm looking out right now at Polar Park, and, I can't beat it. I have an offer.
Did you go to the winter meetings job fair?
I did not. No.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you. I know. Yeah. You can move on. Like, I was curious. Like, I went to it twice since we're in the world of the winter meetings right now. I went to it twice.
Yeah. I've definitely known some people here who've been to it, and it sounds like it's quite the event. So one of the things that you just mentioned, you're how writing a good story, there's nothing better than that. As a baseball writer, you have 162 games. You're expected an article a day every single morning. Like when you were working for the Herald, did your every single morning you have an article? How difficult is that to find a new angle, find a new story? I mean, obviously each game has their different storylines and things like that. But at the end of the day, you are, that could be the 90th win of this team's season. That could be, whatever. So how difficult is that to try to find a creative spin?
It's hard. It's really hard because it's a good point, but it's difficult because the thing that's difficult about it is that you're playing to the passion and the interest of the people reading. That's what you're playing to. But like if the Red Sox, if something happens with the Red Sox, the problem is that the next day in baseball, that narrative could be completely flipped around. And to a certain point, you have to balance that, but you have to almost ignore it sometimes, because you do have to play to the passion, and you do have to go overboard. Like, so you try to temper it and you try to couch it and all of that. But it's a great point, because it's hard. It's hard. I think the good thing is now what has happened, that people aren't obsessed with writing about the game stories, right? So we don't really have to do that anymore. And even at a few years ago, you would worry about, I gotta sprinkle in the game. Like, now it's almost like, don't even worry about it. They'll find the game somehow. They'll find the game somehow. Find the most interesting thing and write about it. And the great thing about baseball is that there are so many interesting things in every game. That's the thing that sucked about well, I was going to say it sucked about the pandemic, but a lot of things sucked about the pandemic. But one of the things for baseball, covering baseball, was that you would want to ask a question about something that happened in a game, and you would have to set up a Zoom call for like 2 weeks down the road. And that's why baseball's so great, is that and you see it, you have this availability, that you have more access than any other sport. So something happens, I'm zeroing in on that. I'm going to write about that. So it's, yeah, so it's a good question. So, but I think the thing is that you just have to go with what is the most interesting thing, and just understand that in 24 hours, it might be dated.
This past season for the Red Sox, I think, is a perfect example of that. Just the runs that this team would go on, and then they would lose, and the story would flip every single day. It was like, oh, well, maybe they could sneak into the playoffs, and then you don't know if they're going to end up at the the bottom of the division, and it was just back and forth all the time. And I think so that's a interesting aspect. And so one of the things I think, if people follow you on social media, at Bradford, right above your shoulder there, you have a lot of interactions and a lot of relationships with players, former players, coaches, that kind of stuff. How much does that play into your ability to write about these players and to write critically about the team? And is that just kind of like an understood aspect of the game, where the players kind of understand that you have to tell the story no matter what it is, or is that kind of a line that you toe?
Well, again, another good question. I think that it's, you like to say that it's an understanding. Relationships are so important in covering baseball, right? It just is. And the biggest thing is, I think the number one thing is the players, or whoever you're talking about, have to trust you, have to respect you, and those are the things that, in other words, if I'm talking with somebody, I go to in a clubhouse, for instance, I'm not going to stand in the middle and hope for one player to come out. I'm going to look at who's available, who's there, what can I talk to them about, and maybe it's just talking, and maybe now in that conversation you find out something. Now you have to say, hey, do you mind if I put my tape recorder in front of your face and we talk about this on the record? I'll give an example. In the critically acclaimed book, A Damn Near Perfect Game with Joe Kelly, which Joe is probably the only one which I say, nah, I will never rip him, who's an active player. But so Joe was telling me this story about how he, when he was drafted, it was around the time of the draft. I was going around asking people about being drafted. And he said that he was drafted the draft fell on his 21st birthday. And so he had a party for this 21st birthday and the draft. So he had this party, and the 21st birthday, by the time the draft started, the 21st birthday had already taken root, let's just say. And so in the second round, the Angels, which are 5 minutes from his house, call and say, how much would it cost to sign you? And Joe said like $1 billion, and hung up and got back to his 21st birthday. Well, they don't draft him. They draft Patrick Corbin. And then he gets drafted in the 3rd round. We figured it out. It probably cost him like $140,000. And so he's telling this story. I say, hey, listen, can I write this story? And so, sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they no. And then Joe is like, yeah, of course. And I want the headline to be blaming on the Jägermeister. And so I'm like, listen, this is why Joe's so great. He's a great personality of the game. Again, a damn near perfect game by now, great holiday present. But there's nothing wrong with just asking someone and making sure. And I think that's a mistake some people get. They hide the tape recorder and then they'll get in trouble. But to come back to your question, it just has to be understood. If something bad happens, you're going to have to write about it. And maybe you do couch a little bit, because the other part about this is that it's a long season. There is a lot of access. You got to be around these guys. So if you're going to be critical, you better be fair about it. And I try to be, and that's the thing. And they're not always going to take it that way. But it's just like anything in life. You do what you think is the right thing to do. And then, you listen to them. If they have a problem with it, if they have a point, great. If they don't, you move on. But it's a lot, but the biggest thing is just reputation and relationships. Like those two things are so key.
Yeah. And so you mentioned you grew up in Nashua, New Hampshire.
Grew up in, I was born in Nashua. Yes.
Born in Nashua.
But much like some of the greats, you're born somewhere completely different where you grew up. I grew up in Essex, Massachusetts, home of the fried clam.
Okay, there we go. So still grew up, I'm assuming, a New England sports fan through and through. Yeah. So with that aspect of it, I feel like that's a whole nother side of things where do you ever have to kind of keep your emotions out of your writing because maybe you are pulling for them to be successful, or do you have to, because you're also a journalist and you need to be able to kind of, play it straight down the middle. How do you handle that part?
So it's asked a lot. And I think that the job's great, right? It's great. It's a great job. It's not always what people think it is, but that's how any job is. The job's great. But one of the unfortunate things ultimately about the job, I think, is that you lose your fandom. And if you don't lose your fandom, you're probably doing it wrong. And so I looked at everything through first of all, probably through a business prism more than anything. And here's the reality is that when the team you cover wins, then it makes the job easier. So that's why you root for the team. I mean, that's just a fact. When they're losing, it can be miserable. It can be difficult. It makes your job a lot more difficult. Human nature, you tend to root for personalities, people you like. That's human nature. But I think really it comes back to that, is that my fandom left a long time ago. My fandom is I'm just fortunate that the team that I grew up in, and we all get into this because we're fans, right? We're fans probably of the teams that we grew up with. And so I'm fortunate in that sense, but it just so happens coincidentally that the team that I cover is the team that I grew up, and that team, if that team does well, it makes my current job easier and it's good for business. That's how it is. When I look at same thing with the Patriots for WEEI.com, I always looked at it that way. Is that I grew up.
It's been a pretty easy year for you, huh?
Yeah, well, no, but that's the great thing. I don't have to deal with it anymore. But but you root for what's good for business, because when you get older, the priority is always going to be your family, your lifestyle, whatever it is. That's the reality of it. So, yeah, I hope I answered that question.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's turn it around to a little bit more, Carson. So I was talking about Craig Breslow. So you had the opportunity to cover Craig back when he was a player. And you hear this all the time. Check out Baseball Isn't Boring, new episode where you talk to Craig's former agent. Everyone says it. Everyone saw this coming for Craig Breslow. He's a Yale graduate. He talked about how the decision to play baseball over becoming a doctor was a relatively easy one for him to make. But he seems like a guy that no matter what he would be doing, he would be successful in it because he is just that smart, that well-spoken, all of those. So when you were covering him, was this pretty much known at that time as well? Were you looking at him going, okay, this guy is going to be an executive at some point?
No, because I think when you're covering players, you only say that about guys who might manage. I don't think you really say that, honestly, about a whole lot of guys that say that guy's going to be in the front office because they're baseball players, right? Mm-hmm. And usually their trades that they suggest are terrible. Like David Ortiz would have been God bless him. He would have been the worst GM of all time. Like the payroll would have been $900 million, $900 million, and
he would have had all of his buddies on the team.
Yeah, so and everyone would be hitting home runs or whatever. So anyway, so I think that's how you look at it. You knew Craig was really, really smart. And as you said, we had Bob Barada on, who was his former agent, and they used to, he knew because he could see him laying the groundwork for it. And part of the groundwork, as he said, was they would go to the winter meetings and take meetings. Now, part of that was getting jobs. Part of it was sort of a genuine curiosity of how things worked in that way. Now, you go to the winter meetings and you see these players milling around, and sometimes they're just looking for a job. They just it's kind of sometimes it's kind of sad, actually. So, but with him, he was wanting to see how this worked, and it's funny because when he got the job with the Cubs, clearly, after he stopped playing, it was all right. I'm going to do this, but it wasn't just, I'm going to take whatever job. Teams knew how smart he was. Teams probably want to integrate him. But he was like, no, I want to do this. Like, here is my basically blueprint for the job that I see that could actually help. Not just the special advisor hanging out, whatever. Let's go scout a game or two. This is what I think it could do. And Theo Epstein was the guy who said, all right, that's good. It's specific. We could see its impact, and obviously it did have an impact, but not a lot of guys would do that. So I think that he had it in his mind, but I don't think I could say, oh, well, that's going to be a gym. Because again, who says that about a player? We don't. It's because I think the other part about that is that it's a longer road, right? Like we see players go to managing, but we don't see players, go to GM a whole bunch. And when they do, it's, Chris Getz, Jerry DiPoto, Chris Young. Well, Chris Young was probably pretty quick, but it still wasn't that quick. Takes a while.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point because your managers are always front and center, and those are those guys that you can always see, and you feel like they haven't left the game when they go into that managerial role. And I'm thinking of the Gabe Kaplers and obviously Cora and guys like that who just seem to be around the game the whole time. But as an executive, you kind of sit back into the shadows, and then all of a sudden you hear about Craig Breslow coming up after his tenure at the Cubs and that kind of stuff. So backtracking a little bit here. So Craig has taken on a very, very good farm system here that has been revitalized in the past 4 or so years. Say what you want about Chaim Bloom, he has really done a fantastic job in making sure that there is a core of young players that the Red Sox are able to pull from. In your mind, who is the next big guy that we could see actually play for the Red Sox in 2024? Is Marcelo, is that a guy that we can possibly see? He was injured for a lot of the second half of last year in Portland. Or is there another guy or another couple of guys that you are, keeping an eye on?
Well, I mean, so there's always a surprise, right? There's always the guy you think is going to start in Worcester or be in Worcester for the whole year. Chris Murphy jumps to mind as a guy who came up and also showed he belongs. And, I don't know if Ceddanne Rafaela classifies because if he was in the major leagues for the last couple months there. And the obvious answer are the big ticket items in this farm system: Roman Anthony, Marcelo Meyer, Nick York, going down a little bit, some other guys. Kyle Teel is going to be coming up here pretty quick. But if you're going to ask me who's the guy on opening day who's going to be on the team that was in Worcester, Brian Mata has to be. Is Brian Mata, and he's an intriguing guy, right? Because he was the number one pitching prospect. He had Tommy John, comes back. Maybe now it sure seems like the bullpen is the way to go for him. But I'll say this, this spring training's so weird, right? We see guys have great spring trainings and then it doesn't work out for whatever reason. And believe me, I see more spring training games than anybody, and I overreact. But if Mata comes out and he has a bad spring training, he can't be sent down. That's going to be a tough one. That's going to be a tough decision. So the hope is that he's lights out, no matter how it looks in spring training. He's lights out. Then you have your bullpen arm, and you go from there. So I think that in the short term, it's him. I am going to be anxious to see how Marcelo bounces back from that shoulder injury. I mean, his whole thing. I mean, that he had the shoulder injury. He actually had it pretty early on in his time in Portland and never really recovered. So now that you think the shoulder's better, will the performance follow? Because the problem is not the problem, but everyone's going to compare him to guys in that 2021 draft. There was a ton of shortstops, and Jordan Lawler's in the major leagues. Matt McClain's in the major leagues. Jackson Merrill is going to be in the major leagues for San Diego. Fair or unfair, this is how it works. We compare, right? So that's going to be, for me, the most interesting one.
I remember just speaking with some of the coaches last year in about that transition that Mata was going to make. And, as a starter, he consistently is in that 95 to, 96, or say 93 to 96 kind of range. And then when he's in the bullpen and he knows that he's got 2 innings to pitch.
Right.
All of a sudden you see that bump up to 99. He's hitting triple digits every once in a while. I always find that so fascinating to see how pitchers change their style, because they know that I'm going to give it my all for these 2 innings, because I know that then I will have my rest time. I'll be able to come back and I'll be able to throw 99 again. And we were talking about a guy like Joe Kelly earlier. I think he's like a perfect example of that. I imagine every pitcher, when they're going up, through college, with exceptions here and there, you want to be a starter. You want to be that guy who takes the ball and throws a complete game and do that. But so that transition right there, it's got to be, pretty tough, I think, emotionally and mentally for some of these pitchers who have been that big game guy for so long. And Brian Mata is that guy who has been, at the forefront of all of the top prospect lists and that kind of stuff. So it's always intriguing to see how players make that transition.
Yeah, and you made a good point. It's not only that, that's what the starting pitching is where the money's at too. I mean, they're not blind to that. And so you're a starter. Ultimately, you're going to be paid more than if you're a really good reliever. And so, but you got to go with what's going to give you a major league career, man. Like Josh Winkowski, I'm sure he wants to start, but the value to the team is what he did last year. So, yeah. So, I mean, I'm really intrigued too.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, Joe Kelly found a nice way to get a paycheck.
Yeah, but think about how long it took him, and even honestly, it's not just like a turnkey thing. It's all right. You're a starter. Now you go to the bullpen. Now you got to what do you look like as a reliever? Can you throw enough strikes? Like with Joe, it was everyone focused so much on his 100-mile-an-hour fastball that was getting hit, to be honest with you. And then he went to the Dodgers, or actually at the end of 2018, Dana Lavangie said, hey, listen, you can start throwing that curveball more. That's your pitch. As weird as that sounds, it's not your 100-mile-an-hour fastball, but that's your pitch. And the Dodgers saw that. They signed him the 3-year deal, and you're on your way. But yeah, I mean, pitching nowadays is so fascinating. It's so fascinating. And you see it there. It doesn't matter what level of minor leagues. It doesn't matter what level of high school. I mean, get out the portable Rapsoda machine and let's go.
Yeah, and so it's another interesting aspect of the AAA side of things is that I'm not sure. You said you were able to get to a couple times out to Polar Park, but this season we had the challenge system in effect for balls and strikes. For it was just on Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. The pitcher, catcher, batter, all able to call to challenge a pitch, and you have 3 of them a game. How do you think that's going to change? Or first of all, do you see that coming to the big leagues? And 2, if it does, like the pitch clock, how is that, do you think, is going to affect the average fan watching the game?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to. You could actually answer that question a lot better than I could because I didn't see it enough. I just hear about it. One of the interesting things that I heard from one player when we were doing the podcast, Matt Bowman, who was relief pitcher for the Yankees, and he went to Princeton, so he's really smart. I got to ask him, why do you pick Princeton over Yale, which is the only time I've ever asked anybody that in baseball. And so, but he said that he thought that this was so oddly specific, but he thought that shorter hitters had a better grasp of the strike zone, of the high strike, because of the automated strike zone in the minor leagues. Guys who had like experienced that coming up, and he mentioned Wilyer Abreu as one of them, and says, they just, because of that, he had noticed that they have a better grasp of it. Now, what's interesting, a day or 2 after he said that, I found out that they actually had changed the measurement of it, right? So
they adjusted it through the year.
That was late in the year, right?
Yep.
That was late in the year. So think about that. That's kind of crazy because you all of a sudden you've gone this way, and then what are you kidding? If I was a pitcher, I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Like all these times, like I walked, take away my 10 walks here because they wouldn't have been walks or whatever, vice versa. So yeah. So anyway, I thought that was really interesting. And what it does is opens the door for complaints. I think ultimately it's probably a good thing. I like the challenge system. You get X amount of challenges. You can challenge them. That's great. Keep the umps, use a challenge system. That's it. Like, I think that's the best way to do it. Nothing wrong with that. And so, yeah, I just, like the pitch clock, it's going to be interesting because last offseason was the first offseason we had this implemented, and we had the opportunity for pitchers in the offseason to bitch and moan about it and say how awful it was going to be. All right, now we've gone through it. Let's see what this is. Like, what are this going to complain? What they did, though, is they opened the door for more complaining because they're going to, lower with guy on to 18 seconds instead of 20. So, yeah. But I think the only thing you can complain about, which I would love to prove, but I can't right now, is the injuries. And is this leading to more injuries? All I know is this. The number that jumped out to me, which I surfaced a couple of weeks ago or last week, 938 pitchers in Major League Baseball. That's too many. Like, for whatever reason that is, what that's doing, and you see it in Worcester. Like, guys get called up, it's like, he's not ready. Like, what's going on? Guys get double-A, he's not ready. 938. 3 teams with 40 or more pitchers that they use. That's too many. So but that's part of the problem, right? I mean, it's this, whether it's injuries or whether it's acceptance of the IL stand, I don't know. Anyway.
Rob, let's put you in the president of baseball operations seat. You are taking over for Craig Breslow. What is Rob Bradford's ideal offseason for the Boston Red Sox?
Well, I mean, everyone knows they need starting pitching. And I think that my ideal offseason is just identifying guys that you really like. And this is going to be simplistic, but it is what it is. Identifying guys that you really like, Yamamoto, Montgomery, whoever it is, Gleyber Torres, whoever it is, and doing what it takes to get them. Because I think that is, I've said this in the past, JP Ricciardi, the former Blue Jays GM, Worcester guy,
Worcester native,
name, basketball coach. He was on with me, and he said something that just stuck, which was when he was with the A's, he would tell Billy Beane, say, hey, listen, remember to focus on who you're getting and not necessarily who you're giving up. You don't give up guys for free, but I think that's lost sometimes. I think that the concern is so much that you got to win the trade by 80% instead of 49%, if that makes any sense. And so it really, I think that's the biggest thing. And I think that's what's been lacking a little bit, that you just, you know what? It's going to get uncomfortable. It's going to get uncomfortable. But if you like Seth Lugo, if you like whoever, you like these guys, then take the criticism from whoever doesn't like him. That's fine. But you like him, then go get him. Yoshida, they did it with Yoshida. They liked Yoshida. They went and got him. People are like, oh, you overpaid. Well, so what? You liked him. You overpaid. If he's good, no one's going to remember that you overpaid for him. So that would just be if it was me, that would just be like, that's what I would do. I would find a way to get the guys that I really like.
And I think that, every GM or president of baseball ops all have their different way of going about it. And we all saw how Dave Dombrowski did it when he was here. He's the ultimate win now type of guy. And I remember the trade at the time when he sent Anderson Espinoza out to San Diego, and Anderson Espinoza, everyone calling him Little Pedro. Everyone was like, what are we doing? And now, for the first time in 5 years, I saw a clip of him playing winter ball.
You know what? Yeah, because he hit Ronald Acuna Jr.
Yeah. So I think that's one of those things where it's like, obviously, you could trade a guy and that prospect can become something. But in order to build the team that's going to win now, and not only win now, but win, in years to come, you got to be ready to make those type of moves. I from your perspective, I think that must be when you're looking at Craig Breslow coming into the first time as a true decision maker for a ball club, that's got to be kind of an intimidating process to be able to. Obviously, he's surrounded by a bunch of awesome, guys who've been in, on the executive side for the Red Sox in a while. But that's got to be kind of an intimidating, process for Craig to go through in year one.
Yeah, all of it's intimidating. You talking to a bunch of GMs, Dombrowski included, at the GM meetings, said, well, when did you feel comfortable that you knew what you had? And they're all like a year, almost to a man. They said it took me a year. And meanwhile, you have Mike Hazen. He says a year, yet he made a trade right out of the gate. You have to rely on other people. And the biggest thing is that you mentioned the Anderson Espinoza trade, and everyone rips Dombrowski. Oh, I got it, the farm system. Well, no, you know what he did? He thinned out the farm system, but he kept the right guys. So when the White Sox are going to trade Chris Sale, he keeps Rafael Devers. He lets Yohan Moncada go. And that's what I think is such an important part of it. Whereas I feel like too many GMs now, they look at everybody in that way. Like they look at, well, it's not necessarily, I am confident that this guy is going to make it. I'm confident in this guy's going to make it. And I think this guy's going to make it. And I think this guy's going to make it. So I'm going to hang on to them. I mean, I love Dayton Moore, former Kansas City GM, and now with the Rangers. He's sort of Chris Young's right-hand man. He came on the Baseballs and Boring podcast, and I loved what he said. He was talking about the trade deadline. And he said they all got, right before the deadline, the Rangers, they're obviously in it, but it's not like they're running away with it. They're slumping a little bit, and Chris Young gets everyone to his house in San Diego, and he sits there and he says, "All right, everybody, does everyone think that we have a legitimate chance to make a run at the World Series? Because if you do, then these names, all these prospects, these names, which we don't want to trade, we're trading them." He's like, that's our reality. That's what you're going to have to get your head around. And think about how many of the modern day current GMs would absolutely never do that. They'd be like, oh, well, maybe, maybe these guys, and I don't want to, and you know what? We might be able to win the World Series, but if you get the chance, you go for it. And you hope that you pick the right guys to trade if you're given an option to trade them.
And that's another aspect that I think is interesting where, Craig didn't draft any of these prospects. He doesn't have that tie to it. So are GMs, like, at least in your sense of it, that if they have drafted that guy, they're more inclined to hold on to them because they want to see that through?
I think it's two different things. I don't buy too much into that where, Craig Breslow's didn't draft Marcelo Myers, so he's going to be more willing to trade him, because at the end of the day, if you trade the wrong guys, then you're going to get criticized, whether you drafted them or not. I think what happens, though, is that the guys who draft these guys, they have a tendency to overvalue them. Because think about that, is that they not only drafted them, not only saw them come up through the system and know more things about these guys than even before when they drafted them, but had invested the time to scout them leading into the draft. So they know so much about them, and they've invested a lot of time and energy and all of it into them. And so I think that's where, and I remember Theo said that way. He's like, yeah, guilty. We probably overvalue guys because we see the absolute best in them. So that's the biggest difference. Not necessarily say, hey, you know what? I can't trade him. Oh, well, I'm more willing to trade him because I didn't draft him.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. The other side of it is the international signings like Yoan Moncada, like that type of I wonder how different that is versus someone that you have signed after the draft out of college in that kind of thing. Because, Yoan Moncada had a massive contract before ever stepping onto a big league field, which, unless you're in the top, however many picks of the draft, you don't have that much money tied to you as so I think the international signings are a very, very, unique kind of aspect to creating a team. And so I'm really, really hoping we get to see Yamamoto's name come up soon in the Red Sox. Hopefully we announce at some point that looks like we're going to be making some pretty good moves for him, or we're attempting to. We're going to be there, but yeah. So Rob, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Hopefully we can have you out in Worcester in the coming season, 2024. Love to see you out here. Maybe we'll get like a first pitch or something.
Oh man, let's do it all. Let's have, this is the year we have a baseballs and boring night at Polar Park.
I love it.
Come on, let's go. Let's do it. I love, there's so many reasons I love going there. First of all, everyone's great. Bill Wanless, everybody. I just named one, but everybody's great. Food is far superior than Fenway Park. So that's always very important. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, I'm down to definitely to celebrate some baseball out there. Let's go.
Awesome. Sounds good. And hopefully I'll see you down in spring training. I'll be down there for a little while as well. So then maybe we can chop it up.
Oh
again.
Yeah. Listen, come up to the booth and you can do innings 7 through 9 on what's your date? What's the date you're going to be there?
We'll probably be there for the week leading up to the first couple of games, and so the first couple of games.
All right, well,
be there for.
Well, we can workshop it in the booth or something. I don't know.
All right, Rob.
Yeah. Anything you need, just let me know.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much and appreciate you coming on to WooSox Insider.
All right. Thank you.